Hello, I'm Tom.
And I'm Hanne. Welcome to the Digital Behaviour Podcast, a podcast about human behaviour in the digital world.
In this podcast, we help you understand what drives online behaviour, how we manage this, and the impact on the wider world.
And today we're going to be meeting Luke Whitaker, an expert in SEO, to discuss his approach to empowering everyone to know a little bit about SEO. But before introducing Luke, let's take a look at a couple of pieces of current research in this area.
So, Hanne, I think you've seen a paper that was interesting, all about public awareness and attitudes towards SEO.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting. It's a recent one from 2023. I think the data was collected a year before that. So it's quite a large study. It's more than 2,000 people. I believe it's in Germany. It was written by Lewandowski and Schultheis. But what's really interesting about this paper is that, a lot of us professionals who sort of have a background in digital marketing and SEO, so search engine optimization, we sort of assume that people know what's happening, what's happening behind the scene, how SEO can actually impact how we see the results in or on search results such as Google. But actually, that's not the case. This particular paper, it is a representative study, so it's really, as I said, 2,000 people. I think 1,000 of those looked at sort of results on a small screen and 1,000 on a larger screen. And results show that actually a lot of people, first of all, couldn't determine what is organic traffic, so what is achieved through search engine optimization, or what is paid for. And when sort of this questionnaire asked some more questions and follow-up questions, it did show that actually almost 70% found or knew that Google uses sort of paid advertising to make the revenue, but that left with 30 people who did not know that Google does take any sort of form of payment or make a revenue from such ads, for example. And when asked sort of what do you think or how do you think Google makes money, actually 2% said that is the sale of user data, So there was quite some sort of interesting findings around what people perceive to be done through paid ads, how Google is making their money, and potentially about selling some of that data as well.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because we as marketers, or particularly teaching marketing, we assume that it's obvious that the first 3 or 4 listings are paid for, because nowadays they say sponsored by them. I think they used to say ad, and it's just changed. But it looks really obvious to us. So the fact that people don't spot that is I guess it's good for the advertisers, but it's surprising to you and I imagine.
No, absolutely. And I find, these studies which sort of look at some of the behavior, from an academic point of view, you might also think, why is that necessarily important? But actually understanding the user more, from an academic as well as practitioner point of view, and understanding that, trust, for example, is really important when it comes to search engines. People trust what they see on search engines. And in this particular study, again, they actually did show that those who sort of were more critical about search engine optimization did worry that actually, people manipulate the results when it comes to being shown higher, So there is this issue with normally search engines is what people trust, with regards to finding information. But when it comes to sort of understanding more about SEO, and in this paper they were given a definition after having been asked some questions, then all of a sudden it's starting, people start to be worried about, is it actually ethical, should be able to manipulate where you're going to be seen on the search results. So it's quite an interesting question, and what we found here, or what they found, not me, including myself and the research team there, what was bad is that actually age does have an impact about what people feel about search engine optimization. They looked into sort of younger, more educated people, and they have more of a positive idea about what SEO is, what the consequences. And I believe you've looked at a paper as well where it was sort of looking into age, is that correct?
Absolutely. And again, it kind of reflects the same thing, that I was surprised that there are people who don't use search engines in the same way as me and don't have the same knowledge as me. Not that I'm particularly young at all, but I just assume that people are fairly knowledgeable about how these things work. And yeah, there were 2 papers that actually are linked to each other. One was in Computers and Human Behaviour, which is a journal that I particularly enjoy, led by Aline Chevalier. And this was looking at really how age affects how people answer search questions and how people search for the data when they're using search engines. And then that was then also followed up more recently in 2019, so still a few years ago, but relevant to today still, which was published, led by Raffaella Nori. And the research basically found that there are differences in how different age groups use Google search. And what they did is they gave groups of people, 10 young, 10 older, originally in the first piece of research, 9 questions. Some of them, 3 of them were difficult, 3 of them were of medium difficulty, and 3 of them were very easy to answer. So to give you an idea of the sort of questions that they were asked to find within Google, it was things like, what is Edith Piaf's date of birth? That was a simple one. A more difficult one was, what vegetable family does the Nerta belong to? Which I don't know. I'd have to use Google to answer that. And then there were actually 3 that were actually impossible. So how many eggs does an armadillo lay per litter? And actually, there was no data on that, I presume, because maybe armadillos don't lay eggs. So I guess that must be the reason why. And they basically found that the older participants provided less accurate answers. And the older participants also tended to rely on the data provided within Google rather than clicking on the links and actually looking what websites were saying. So they were very reliant on Google providing them with the information in the search engine itself, rather than going beyond that. And then in the second paper, they did the same, except that it had 18 younger and 18 older adults. And in this case, they found that the accuracy was similar for both groups, but the older participants were slower. So in both papers, there are differences between older and younger participants in terms of how they go about finding information in Google, which I guess is, it makes me think about other variables you could throw in. How does personality traits affect search engine use? How does gender affect search engine use? Probably other studies that we could do to look at this, but it just struck me that there are, demographic, perhaps psychographic differences in how to use search engines.
Absolutely.
Which you need to consider.
And in this paper, they also found that education made a difference, so it wasn't just age, but they actually found that younger, more educated people, have different views and knowledge about SEO, which I think is quite interesting as well, and does pose some questions about, whether maybe less educated people need some education with regards to SEO, whether that is something that needs to be the responsibility of either the search engines, or governments or anything like that, because, it should be a sort of level playing field when it comes to these techniques that are being used, to make websites stand out more. Well, I think this might be a great time to introduce our guests. Luke. Hi, Luke, and thank you very much for joining us today on our podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do?
I can. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I am now a senior SEO consultant at an agency based in Exeter called Organic. And what I do is work across a range of clients, consulting, trying to help them improve their optimization levels. I have a good mix of clients. I've got some smaller SaaS clients, SaaS payment software, but then also most of my time kind of goes on the Sainsbury's group, which is a really good thing to have. And it's been amazing to learn lots about all the structures of the sites and just really apply SEO to sites like Argos and Sainsbury's, which is in its whole other realm in SEO terms. And I also lead on the empowerment offering that we do. So across all of our clients and internally, we have a SEO 101 and a 102 deck that I'm always updating and delivering to new starters or just teams across the Sainsbury's group to try and increase the awareness of what SEO is and try and get some knowledge building there.
Can I ask a practical question? And welcome to the podcast, Luke. I'm sorry to jump in with this one, but you mentioned that the agency is called Organic. Does that pose any problems in a Google search?
We are quite lucky. I mean, lots of people will be searching for organic agency, and lots of the clients that we get kind of come from referrals.
Yeah, sorry, it just suddenly struck me that when you mentioned that, but yeah, obviously the name says what you do, like on the side of a tin. So I noticed also you have a podcast, which we should talk about. So your podcast is all about making everyone a little bit SEO. What is it that you're trying to achieve with your podcast?
Yeah, so we called it that really long title just because that's kind of what we say to clients and how we kind of explain empowerment. So if you can just make everyone a little bit SEO, then you're going to see improvement across, optimization levels on all the sites. So yeah, what I've done is teamed up with our marketing manager, Jess, senior marketing manager. Don't want to get her title wrong. She'll be messaging me. And we just try and go through the latest stories. So I create a newsletter every Friday that goes out to clients as well. And we kind of go through this newsletter, and Jess is there to really help me break it down and make sure I'm not just talking in jargon or just expecting people to understand what Google is actually doing. So it seems to work quite well. And yeah, we're on episode 6 so far.
So making everyone a little bit SEO is about empowering people in their role. And why is that your mission? Why does that feel so important to you?
Yeah, so what we find is there are digital teams at some clients that work on the site, but I've actually had somebody message before and they didn't even know what SEO was, yet they were updating pages on the website every single day. So it's really important to kind of improve their awareness, increase it of SEO, even if they don't feel like they could then go and implement SEO. As long as they're aware of what SEO teams do, they know when to reach out. So then we can jump in and kind of make sure that the right considerations are there for what they're doing. And we find if we can we're always trying to do this, especially in the Sainsbury's group, extend how many teams we're getting involved. If somebody touches a website, we kind of want them to come to empowerment sessions. So then they know that they can reach out to us if they need to.
Great. And I guess it's becoming more important as well as the tools that involve search. I mean, Google is the number one for, people searching for just about anything, but, e-commerce includes search, social media includes search. So understanding, the words, how the words you use relate to how users might use those platforms is important for everyone in lots of walks of life, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And what I find as well, when I'm delivering a 101 or a 102, lots of people on the sessions are amazed by what some of the tools can do, not just for SEO, but it can help them understand, say they're a product manager or a buyer somewhere, they can kind of investigate their audience a bit further and get some insight that they might not have had before just through keyword research or Google Trends. And yeah.
You mentioned that already, sort of people in the field not necessarily knowing what SEO is, or, the paper or one of the papers we discussed that was found, only 30% of the respondents knew how ads differ from organic results, and that users generally seem to know very little about sort of search engine optimization. And this is sort of your opinion, but given sort of the relative ease of companies to, just pay for an ad on Google and potentially, not reaping the benefits of actually having to be seen high in the organic search engine results, would you say it's still sort of worth for businesses to really invest in strong SEO instead of just paying for an ad, and what the benefits are?
Yeah. So we do have a paid ads department at Organic, so I'll try not to put them down too much. But I think paid ads, especially on Google, have their place, especially in, say, short-term campaigns that maybe you haven't had time to get the organic results up high enough before it kicks off.
Yeah.
But what we do find is if you invest in SEO, the return on investment is going to be much higher than it might be with paid advertising. And also the benefit of doing SEO, kind of a passive benefit, is that through doing it, you'll be improving your site. You'll be looking at the user journey across the whole site. So naturally your site should flow better as a result of doing SEO, which of course is going to benefit your optimization level. But then often when you're doing a paid ad campaign, you might just create one landing page that you're directing all your traffic to. And also it can be very costly to do paid. It depends who else is bidding on it. And of course, there's a charge with SEO. You need to pay somebody to implement it, but you're never going to be paying a huge price just for somebody to click on it. And lots of the time as well, what I say, especially to the Sainsbury's group, is if we can be showing up, say, for Argos for a range of products, and somebody's kind of browsing through, they're at the top of the funnel at the moment, deciding what exactly they're looking for. If Argos keeps showing up, then you're boosting that brand awareness, and they might just go straight to Argos in the future because they kept seeing you appear in Google to begin with. And this can be difficult to do with paid.
Well, that's really interesting that it's almost more of a holistic approach, isn't it? So it's not just sort of the sole goal of being sort of first on the search engine, but it's also looking at all the additional benefits that, I guess, benefiting the company when it comes to having a well-structured website that feeds into, stronger SEO results. But not necessarily that being that's really interesting.
And I think we're going to go on to talk about AI AI after as well. But through doing SEO, you should be focusing on lots of helpful content. And if we're going to have Google search engine results pages that just have a lot of AI on now, if we're creating really good content, then we're hopefully improving our chances of it being lifted into Google. Whereas if you're just focusing on paid campaigns, you're probably not going to have a lot of useful content.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you made about there being a place for paid. I mean, I often say to students that way more than 90%, I think, of clicks are through organic links. But if you want to be number one straight away in a Google search, then sometimes you do have to pay, like you say, for short-term campaigns. Or if you're a business that doesn't have much content or much history, then starting out with paid might be a place for that before you build a longer-term strategy using SEO. So it's interesting that your agency does both. I was going to ask you a question about, you've been in this industry for several years, and you've probably seen some changes to the things that make a difference. I know that you talked about that in one of your podcast episodes about algorithm changes actually, and how that affects your listing, which means that it's an ever-changing, evolving world for you to work in. I mean, the clients can't sit still, I imagine, as well, a bit like Formula One. If you sit still, you end up losing ranking. So have you seen many algorithm changes in the time that you've been working in this industry?
Yes, so they seem to be increasing. So over the past 2 years, we've had, I think last year was like between 11 and 13 updates from Google, and they're getting bigger. And we've got one rolling out at the moment, the March core update. And what I'm noticing is the focus is really on helpful content. Google is kind of clamping down on knowing that people might be using AI to generate a lot of their content. And we are just being told to really focus on understanding your user and make sure that you're creating unique and helpful content that's going to hopefully improve your chances. And I'm seeing a lot of volatility when they do get implemented, and lots of impact.
But my impression is they don't seem to be quite as well publicized as they were in the past. So they were called big names like Panda and Penguin and Hummingbird in the past, but now they seem to, I'm sure you can find out about them if you want to look for them, but they're not quite as well known by, certainly not by people on the street. Is that accurate, that they're a bit quieter in how they make those changes?
I think so, yeah. I'm not too sure. I'm not sure how old I was when the Panda and Penguins were rolling out. But you certainly have to dive a bit deeper to find what they're actually doing. And lots of the time, they won't really give you much information anyway. So it can be a matter of letting it roll out, see what kind of been impacted, what kind of sides of the site have been impacted, and then go from there and try and work out how to reverse any negative impact you've had.
Yeah. Why do you think the frequency of new ones being rolled out is increasing? Any sort of thoughts?
I think because people can generate content so easy now, and you can make a website so easy, and there's so many results. I think we've got an example with the empowerment decks, and like 10 years ago for one search term, there were so many million results, and now it's like up to 60 million. So there's just so much for them to filter through. There's so much choice, and Google needs to stay as the leading search engine. So they need to make sure that they have got good ranking factors that are going to give people relevant results.
Look, another question with regards to size of the business. I mean, you said quite a lot of your work is part of the Sainsbury's Group, so that's quite, large names in the UK in particular. Would you say it's harder for sort of smaller websites and smaller businesses to succeed in SEO? And are there any sort of, tips or tricks that you can give to sort of smaller, business to say it's still worth doing SEO, even if you might not be sort of a huge household brand such as Sainsbury's?
Yeah, I think it's still definitely worth doing. And what I would say is look at, maybe if you're competing with big sites, look at what content they're producing and think about how you can create unique content that maybe answers a lot more questions than they're originally doing. Because lots of the time we find these big sites and they haven't really thought about frequently asked questions or where people are actually looking to get their answers. And if they created this kind of tangential type content that isn't directly trying to sell them something, they might do better. And I think this is where small sites can come in and really have this good content that is answering questions and being more useful than these big sites that are probably just trying to funnel you down to purchase.
Yeah, you've mentioned AI a couple of times, and you don't not saying you sound negative about AI or the use of AI, but would you say there's a place for using generative AI when it comes to potentially, predicting search trends or, discovering efficient keywords? Is there any time where you would say to your clients, yes, there is a, place and time to use generative AI?
Yeah, so I've used it a few times, and what I say is that we should be seeing like Chat GPT as a very, very junior colleague. So it can be useful as an initial start. I think I used it just because I couldn't find any good FAQs for a certain page. So I asked it to generate me some. And then what I'll do is I take those FAQs and dive a bit deeper, make sure that there's good search volumes there, see what other people are writing about. So I think there's a place, and at the moment, especially when it comes to creating content, is to see it as a first step or just a very junior member. You shouldn't be just lifting it off and putting it on your website and expecting it to do well.
Do you have any views on how that might evolve in the years to come? And obviously we're at very early stages yet, but I'm not asking you to make rock solid predictions, but any views on what might be useful for your industry involving AI?
Yeah, it's only going to get smarter, and I've got a colleague who's kind of more in the technical side of SEO. He does a lot of kind of automation with it, Python scripting, and I think it's really getting there with the technical side. I can't predict where it's going to go with copywriting. I'm sure it's going to get a lot smarter. I don't want to say it's going to put people out of jobs, but we shall see. I do think it's going to get to a level where, yeah, it can probably do most of the heavy lifting of copywriting. But then I'm expecting Google to maybe start implementing things that it can see that it's written by AI. So we will see.
Yeah. I mean, my view generally is that, yes, it might take over some things that we currently do, but there's still going to be other things that we'll need to do. And maybe more important things we can move on to, or, things that we haven't yet considered that we might end up doing as part of our marketing roles. Just allowing for the fact that, yeah, like you say, copywriting might not be something that we have to worry about anymore. We can do something, more important than copywriting, maybe, or yes. So it should be useful to us if it takes those jobs, particular tasks away rather than full-time, jobs away.
I think so. And what I will say is creating the prompts for, say, ChatGPT is an art. So if anybody is looking for a career that is probably going to be paying a lot soon, I'd go into prompt writing.
Good point. I just wanted to move on and talk about some maybe other search engines that might also be important. And clearly, Google is the dominant player, I imagine. Am I right in thinking that most of your work involves Google?
Yeah, so they are the biggest market share still. And through all these updates they do, they're our biggest focus just because they seem to be leading.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, some companies might, if their market is relevant to Bing or Yahoo, might also want to focus on some of those and other search engines. But also, of course, search engines are integral to many other online environments. So Amazon, for example, eBay, companies need to think about their search results in terms of how they're going to appear in the search in those platforms too, as well as social media. I mean, we search for things on Facebook, we search for things on Twitter, for example. So are there any differences in your view in the principles when you're trying to optimize a brand in other platforms beyond Google? Or are the principles fairly similar?
Yeah, so to begin with, I caused a big argument in the office because I called TikTok a search engine. And there's this split, and I've said this before, I think, that older people in the office don't see TikTok as a search engine. They see it as a site with a search function. Whereas I'm saying that the kind of description of a search engine has changed, and this is the new modern look of a search engine. So that's a whole debate. And I think, yeah, hopefully in time, people will start seeing these sites as search engines. But in terms of the principles across them all, for me, I would say I'm sure there are algorithmic changes. I know Jess, our marketing manager I do a podcast with for LinkedIn, is always testing. If I add an emoji, should I put the link in the comments, see if I get more reach that way, more impressions? But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to knowing your users, your target audience, and that really should be our focus. So especially for Google over the years, people used to really focus on optimizing for Google, what Google likes. And now Google tells us we should focus on the user, which we should have always been doing. And Google, the algorithm now is so smart that it is basically a person anyway. So we should really be doing our research, even if it's on TikTok. What are they watching? What do they like to see? How could we replicate this for our brands? They actually enjoy it. And that should be your focus. And the same goes for any search engine, really.
You mentioned actually in there about different perceptions of different platforms according to demographics, age in particular, I think. And that was something we referred to earlier on in terms of specifically how people use Google, which I know is a slightly different topic to how they use different platforms. But are demographics of a particular age something that you ever consider when you're optimizing a particular website? Do you think about how different people might find this website, for example?
Yeah, definitely. And what I find a lot as well in empowerment sessions is that older demographic people that come along are genuinely quite blown away by what Google can do and what you can implement to target people. But when it comes to kind of considering how people might access what you're doing, I think what we always try and do is just ensure we're writing for all levels, all capabilities. Keep your writing simple. I think there's a set age that's recommended, but I don't want to say it's quite young. So if you're writing for somebody with that age, then you should be appealing to everybody and should be understandable to everybody.
Great.
You said, Nick, one of the sort of key features is writing or optimizing your website in a way that, you really think of the user rather than, catering towards the search engine. Again, do you have any sort of top tips of, how to know about your user? Because I think if I was to think of it again, maybe an SME, a smaller business, or even a charity or a social enterprise, they might have a bit of an idea. But with regards to especially their sort of online behavior, what would you say are good steps or first steps to try to know more about your user and how to optimize the website?
So there are some great tools out there, and I could go on and list all of those. But what I always like to say is to actually use the search, so the search engine results pages. I have a plugin called Keywords Everywhere, which does a lot for you, so you can kind of see what people are searching around it. But if you can't pay for that, I think it's so much a month. Use the people also ask box, see what people put in, say your main seed keywords that's related. If it's a charity, just put in some kind of services you offer at the charity, and then scroll down and see what people are then going on to search and lift these out as kind of your long tail keywords. And then you can kind of start to build upon those further. So just using things that are available for free. And then also Google Trends is really good to look at if you're looking to see when things are peaking. And these are all useful things to do.
I've seen quite a lot of, statistics that say that people are using long tail keywords much more nowadays over the last sort of couple of years. Is that something you would agree with?
I think so, and it's definitely something I try and push. So it can be difficult with sites that are very used to high search volume keywords, and say big e-commerce sites we work with, they don't need to go after the long tail ones because Argos will rank for most of the products they sell. But I see value in really going a bit deeper and pulling out these long tail terms and creating content for it. And actually recently I've had a smaller client that is in a very niche HR space, and there were no keywords with any search volume. So what I've recommended is the next step is diving into, say, Reddit or related forums and see what people are actually talking about and asking about that are in the HR space, lifting these out because we know they're going to be interested in it because they're asking about it on forums or discussion sites. So it can take ages, but I think it's really worthwhile. And if we're being told by Google to focus on helpful content, I think there's nothing more helpful than really knowing your user and going that deep into the long tail keywords.
And I think one just follow up on that one is really knowing what language your users are using, as you said, going into forums such as Reddit and understanding what are the words that they're using, because as a professional, you might call it something else, but that doesn't mean that people aren't searching for it. They might just use different terminology.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's hard because doing that will take a long time and it's a very manual process, but I think it will be worthwhile, especially when there's no search terms around anyway, because you're so niche.
Just for clarification for our listeners as well, so long tail keywords, is that just any keywords? Is it longer than five words, or is there a hardcore definition for it?
Yeah, so long tail can actually be one word, But what this means is that it has a lot less search volume, but higher intent. So it could literally be one word and it could have 2 searches a month, but these 2 people might convert every time. So as long as the intent is higher and the search volume's lower, we class that as long tail. But naturally what this does mean is that lots of them are longer, more words in them. So yeah.
Makes sense.
There was actually a book written called, I think, The Long Tail by Chris Anderson in the noughties at some point, 2005, 6, something like that. He was the former editor of Wired magazine, and where he talked about it's basically talking about the tail of a graph and how the internet enables businesses to cater for very niche audiences because the cost of running a business online is so low compared to running a shop. And that's, I don't know if that's where the word came from originally or if he just jumped on the bandwagon and used it for his book, but I often use it when I'm explaining to students why it's called a long tail or a short tail, where the word tail comes from. So
I was going to say that graph, because it's literally a tail on the graph. Yeah. And then lots of people think it's because it's a long word, but I did, but I don't want to admit that.
Well, you've given us lots of practical tips in there and lots of tools that you use. That's very, very helpful. And thank you very much for your time and your thoughts on the importance of SEO, particularly sharing awareness of SEO among people within an organization. That's been brilliant. Obviously, I've mentioned your podcast several times, which people should subscribe to, particularly on Spotify. That's called Making Everyone a Little Bit SEO. But is there any other way in which people can contact you, Luke?
Yes, you can email me. Would you like my email to put in the description? Yeah, you can definitely drop me an email. You can add me on LinkedIn. I will always respond, even if I take a few days.
And you're Luke Whitaker. Again, we'll spell out your name on the description. Maybe put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well, just to make sure people find the right one. I did discover there's another Luke Whitaker in Exeter who's a computer scientist, who I initially thought was you, but related interests, but not the same person. Brilliant. And I'm supposed to say, and I always forget to say this, that if you enjoy this podcast, you should obviously subscribe to our podcast as well, the Digital Behaviour Podcast. Hanne and I would love to get more subscribers and love you to share the word with other people as well. So please do share with other people if you enjoyed this.
Thank you very much for being here. It was really interesting to have this chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.